What happens when the most elite soldiers in the world hand a woman what they think is a useless weapon, expecting her to fail? What they didn't know was that Sarah Chen had spent 15 years perfecting something no military academy teaches. She had learned to turn mockery into fuel, doubt into determination, and broken equipment into deadly precision. The Navy SEALs thought they were watching a setup for humiliation. Instead, they witnessed the birth of a legend. Sarah Chen stood at the edge of the shooting range, her boots planted firm on the concrete that had seen 1,000 warriors prove their worth. The California sun beat down mercilessly, but she didn't flinch. Around her, 12 Navy SEALs lounged with the casual arrogance of men who owned every space they entered. "Look what they sent us," muttered Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, spitting tobacco juice into a paper cup. His voice carried that particular brand of disdain reserved for outsiders who dared step into their world. The other SEALs chuckled. They had been expecting another military contractor, probably some desk jockey with a clipboard and theories about weapon efficiency. Instead, they got a 5'4" woman in civilian clothes who looked like she belonged in a laboratory, not a combat zone. Sarah heard every word. She always did. 28 years of being underestimated had given her exceptional hearing when it came to whispered doubts. Commander Blake stepped forward, his face wearing the expression of a man forced to waste his afternoon. "Miss Chen, I understand you're here to demonstrate some new targeting system for our weapons evaluation." "That's correct, sir." Sarah's voice was steady, professional. She had learned long ago that showing emotion in these situations was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. Blake gestured toward a table lined with rifles. "Well, have at it. We've got real training to get back to." The SEALs gathered around like spectators at a carnival sideshow. Some pulled out their phones, probably expecting to record another civilian making a fool of themselves on military equipment. Sarah approached the weapon table. Her eyes scanned the options methodically. M4 carbines, sniper rifles, various assault weapons, all maintained to military standards. But something caught her attention immediately. At the far end of the table sat an older model rifle, its stock slightly warped from age and use. The scope was mounted incorrectly, tilted just enough to throw off any accuracy. The barrel showed signs of wear that suggested it hadn't been properly maintained in months. She picked it up. "Oh, that one?" Sergeant Rodriguez laughed. "That piece of junk's been sitting in storage for 2 years. Scope's been busted since before I got here. You might want to choose something that actually works, lady." The other SEALs joined in the laughter. Someone whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Maybe she thinks it matches her outfit." Sarah turned the rifle over in her hands, feeling its weight, studying the imperfections. To everyone watching, it looked like she was examining a weapon she didn't understand. What they couldn't see was the rapid calculation happening behind her calm expression. She had grown up the daughter of a precision instrument maker in San Francisco's Chinatown. Her father had taught her that broken didn't mean useless, and that understanding a tool's flaws was the first step to mastering it. "This will do fine," she said simply. Blake shook his head. "Ms. Chen, I really think you should choose different equipment. We want to give your demonstration a fair shot." "I appreciate that, Commander. But I'd like to use this one." The SEALs exchanged glances. This was getting interesting. Either this woman was completely clueless, or she was setting herself up for spectacular failure. Blake shrugged. "Your call." Rodriguez set up the standard targets. As Rodriguez jogged downrange to position the targets, Sarah took the opportunity to examine her chosen weapon more closely. The scope was indeed mounted poorly, but the offset was consistent. The barrel wear created a specific pattern that would affect bullet trajectory in predictable ways. Most importantly, the trigger mechanism, while worn, had developed a particular sensitivity that could actually work in her favor. She had encountered similar problems during her previous life as a competitive shooter. Before her career in weapons development, before the corporate laboratories and government contracts, Sarah had spent 8 years on various shooting circuits. Not the kind that made headlines or attracted sponsors, but the underground competitions where equipment failures were common and adaptation was survival. Her father used to say, perfect tools make lazy craftsmen. Broken tools make masters. The targets were set at various distances, 50 meters, 100 meters, and 200 meters. Standard military evaluation distances, nothing exotic. Whenever you're ready, Blake called out. Sarah shouldered the rifle. The stock's warp actually fit her shoulder better than a standard military issue would have. She adjusted her stance slightly to compensate for the scope's offset, making mental calculations for the barrel wear's effect on bullet drop. The SEALs grew quiet. Whatever they had expected, the woman holding the rifle looked like she actually knew what she was doing. Through the misaligned scope, Sarah could see the first target clearly once she compensated for the tilt. Her breathing steadied. The worn trigger required a lighter touch than standard military weapons, and she adjusted her finger pressure accordingly. The first shot rang out across the range. A perfect center hit on the 50-meter target. Lucky shot, someone muttered, but the confidence in the voice had wavered. Sarah worked the bolt smoothly, chambering the next round. The rifle's action was actually smoother than many newer weapons, worn in rather than worn out. Second shot. Center hit on the 100-meter target. The SEALs weren't laughing anymore. They pressed closer to the spotting scopes, confirming what they were seeing. Sarah's breathing remained controlled as she adjusted for the longest distance. 200 meters with a damaged scope and worn barrel should have been impossible for precise shooting. She made minute adjustments to her aim, compensating not just for the weapon's flaws, but for the slight crosswind she could feel against her cheek. Third shot. Another center hit. The silence stretched across the range like a held breath. Well, I'll be damned, Rodriguez said quietly. But Sarah wasn't finished. She had requested this demonstration for a specific purpose, and 3 lucky shots wouldn't accomplish her goal. Commander Blake, she called out. Would it be possible to set up moving targets? Blake's eyebrows rose. Moving targets? With that rifle? Yes, sir. If it's not too much trouble. Blake looked at his men. Rodriguez shrugged and jogged back downrange to activate the motorized target system. Clay pigeons on mechanical arms would swing across the firing zone at irregular intervals. This was where most civilian demonstrations fell apart. Hitting stationary targets was one thing. Tracking moving targets with precision required years of training and top-quality equipment. Sarah watched the targets begin their erratic dance. She studied their patterns for 30 seconds, noting the timing, the speed variations, the slight mechanical delay in the motor system that created a predictable rhythm beneath the apparent randomness. She raised the rifle again. The first moving target was crossing from left to right at medium speed. Sarah led it by what looked like far too much to compensate for both the scope offset and her calculated bullet travel time. Shot. Hit. The clay pigeon exploded in a cloud of orange dust. A murmur ran through the watching SEALs. This was no longer looking like beginner's luck. Sarah tracked the second target, moving faster and at a greater distance. The calculations in her head included wind speed, target velocity, mechanical lag time, scope compensation, and barrel wear deviation. Shot. Hit. By the fourth moving target, the SEALs had stopped murmuring entirely. They watched with the focused attention of professionals recognizing expertise they hadn't expected to encounter. Sarah lowered the rifle and turned to face Commander Blake. The weapon system I've developed doesn't replace skilled marksmanship, she said. It enhances it by providing real-time compensation for equipment variables, environmental factors, and target movement prediction. Blake stared at the destroyed targets downrange, then back at Sarah. Miss Chen, exactly what kind of contractor did they send us? Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving at the base. The kind that believes broken equipment is just another problem to solve, sir. Rodriguez approached carrying the spotting scope he had been using to confirm hits. Ma'am, I've been shooting for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone adapt to a damaged weapon that fast. How did you know how to compensate for all those variables? Experience with imperfect conditions, Sergeant. Most of my competitive shooting was done with whatever equipment was available, not always what was ideal. Blake was studying Sarah with new interest. You mentioned a weapons system. What exactly are we talking about? A targeting assistance program that can be integrated into existing scopes and weapon platforms. It analyzes multiple variables in real time and provides compensation data to the shooter. Think of it as GPS for bullets. And you can make it work with any weapon? Even damaged ones? Sarah glanced back at the rifle she had just used. Especially damaged ones, sir. Perfect equipment is predictable. Broken equipment teaches you to see what others miss. The demonstration had accomplished exactly what Sarah had hoped. She had proven that her targeting system wasn't just theoretical technology for laboratory conditions. It was practical enhancement for real-world situations where equipment failed and conditions were far from ideal. But, more than that, she had earned something that couldn't be programmed into any computer system: the respect of warriors who had seen too many civilians make promises they couldn't keep. Blake handed her a business card. Ms. Chen, I think we need to have a much longer conversation about your system. Can you stay for dinner? I'd like you to meet some people. Sarah pocketed the card. I'd be honored, Commander. As the group walked back toward the base buildings, Rodriguez fell into step beside her. Ma'am, I owe you an apology for what I said earlier. That was unprofessional. No offense taken, Sergeant. I've heard worse. I bet you have. Rodriguez paused. Can I ask you something? How did you know that rifle would work? Most people would have taken one look at it and asked for different equipment. Sarah considered her answer. My father taught me that every tool has a personality. The trick isn't finding a perfect tool. It's learning to speak the language of whatever tool you have. Rodriguez nodded slowly. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. He also taught me that the people who mock you for accepting broken equipment are usually the same people who panic when their perfect equipment fails. The group reached the mess hall, and Blake held the door open for Sarah. Well, Miss Chen, consider us officially interested in learning more about your system. But, first, I think you've earned the right to hear some of our own stories about making broken equipment work in impossible situations. As Sarah entered the mess hall, she reflected on how different this day had ended compared to how it began. She had come prepared to prove her technology's worth. Instead, she had proven her own worth first, which made all the difference. The mockery she had endured at the beginning of the day had transformed into genuine curiosity and professional respect. The faulty weapon they had handed her, expecting failure, had become the tool that opened doors she hadn't even known existed. But this was only the beginning. The real challenges lay ahead, and Sarah was about to discover that earning the SEAL's respect was just the first step in a much larger and more dangerous journey. 3 months after the shooting demonstration, Sarah found herself in a place she had never imagined, strapped into the back of a military transport helicopter flying over the mountains of Afghanistan at 2 a.m. The invitation had come directly from Commander Blake 2 weeks earlier. A real-world field test of her targeting system, he had explained. A special operations mission where her technology could be evaluated under actual combat conditions. What Blake hadn't mentioned was that she would be going along for the ride. Ma'am, we're 10 minutes out from the drop zone, shouted Staff Sergeant Rodriguez over the helicopter's rotor noise. He was part of the 8-man SEAL team that had volunteered for this mission specifically to test Sarah's system. Sarah checked the tablet computer strapped to her arm. The targeting assistance program she had developed was connected wirelessly to the scopes on 3 of the team's rifles. Real-time data from wind sensors, rangefinders, and ballistic computers flowed across her screen in neat columns of numbers. But Sarah wasn't looking at the data. She was looking at the faces of the men around her. 3 months ago, these same SEALs had watched her demonstration with skepticism and amusement. Tonight, their lives depended on technology she had created in her garage laboratory back in San Francisco. The mission was supposed to be straightforward. Intelligence had identified a Taliban weapons cache hidden in a mountain cave system. The cache contained Russian-made anti-aircraft missiles that posed a serious threat to coalition aircraft in the region. A standard demolition mission: get in, plant explosives, get out. But nothing about tonight was standard. The intelligence had been wrong about the location's security. Instead of the expected handful of guards, thermal imaging had revealed at least 20 armed men positioned around the cave entrance. The mission had shifted from demolition to precision elimination. Problem is the distance, Blake had explained during the briefing. The closest we can position without being detected is 800 meters. That's extreme range for reliable shots, especially in mountain conditions with unpredictable wind patterns. Traditional military doctrine would have called for backup, maybe air support, definitely more men. Instead, Blake had looked at Sarah and asked, "Can your system handle those variables?" Sarah had run the calculations on her tablet. Wind speed variations, altitude effects on bullet trajectory, temperature differential impacts, target movement prediction algorithms. Her system was designed exactly for situations like this. Yes, she had answered simply. Now, suspended in a helicopter racing toward a mountain where 20 armed men waited unknowingly, Sarah wondered if confidence and capability were the same thing. The helicopter began its descent. Through the open door, Sarah could see the Afghan landscape spreading below them like a wrinkled brown blanket. Somewhere in those mountains was a cave filled with weapons. Somewhere in the darkness ahead were men who would kill any American they encountered. 2 minutes, the pilot announced. Rodriguez checked his rifle for the third time in 10 minutes. Like the other SEALs testing Sarah's system, his weapon was equipped with a modified scope that received targeting data from her computer. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, his voice tight with pre-mission tension. "What happens if your computer crashes out there?" Sarah looked at the tablet screen. Green lights across all system indicators. "Then, you shoot the old-fashioned way, Sergeant. The system enhances your skills, it doesn't replace them." "And if the system gives us wrong information?" Sarah met his eyes. "Then, people die, and it's my fault." The brutal honesty seemed to satisfy Rodriguez more than technical reassurances would have. The helicopter touched down in a valley 3 miles from the target location. The SEALs moved with practiced efficiency, unloading equipment and establishing a temporary perimeter. Sarah had trained for this moment during 2 months of intensive preparation at the base in California. Physical conditioning, basic combat skills, equipment operation under stress. But no amount of training could have prepared her for the absolute silence of a night combat zone. The team moved through the darkness like ghosts. Sarah followed in the middle of the formation, her tablet providing navigation data and real-time updates on wind conditions measured by portable sensors the lead scout was placing along their route. After 40 minutes of careful movement through rocky terrain, they reached the observation position Blake had selected. Sarah set up her equipment while the SEALs established firing positions. Through night vision scopes, she could see the cave entrance 837 meters away. Her system automatically calculated the exact distance and began factoring in environmental variables. "I count 19 visible targets," whispered Petty Officer Martinez, the team's designated marksman. "Most are clustered around the entrance, but I've got at least 4 roaming patrols." Sarah's tablet showed the same information, but with additional data. The system was tracking movement patterns, calculating probability zones for where targets would be at given times, and generating firing solutions for multiple scenarios. "Wind speed is varying between 12 and 18 miles per hour, she whispered into her headset. "But there's a pattern. Every 43 seconds, there's a calm period lasting 8 to 10 seconds. Blake studied the target area through his scope. "Martinez, can you take the sentry on the left during the next calm period?" Martinez adjusted his position slightly. Sarah's system fed targeting data directly to his scope display. Range, wind compensation, bullet drop calculation, target movement prediction. "I have a solution," Martinez confirmed. Sarah watched her tablet as the wind speed indicators fluctuated. 18 miles per hour. 16. 14. 12. Calm period in 10 seconds, she whispered. 8 seconds. 6. 4. The wind stopped. Now, Sarah said quietly. Martinez fired. The target dropped instantly, without sound, without alert to his companions. Clean hit, Blake confirmed through his scope. Sarah felt a surge of professional satisfaction mixed with something darker. Her technology had just participated in ending a human life. The mathematics that had seemed so abstract in her laboratory had become lethally concrete. But there was no time for philosophical reflection. Patrol coming around the north side, Rodriguez reported. 2 targets, moving fast. Sarah's system tracked the moving figures and calculated intercept points. They'll be exposed in the clearing for 12 seconds starting in 30 seconds. Blake positioned 2 shooters to cover the clearing. Sarah fed targeting data to both scopes simultaneously, calculating for the different angles and ranges each shooter would face. The patrol entered the clearing exactly when her system predicted. 2 shots fired within half a second of each other. 2 targets down. This is incredible, whispered Martinez. It's like having a crystal ball. But Sarah was watching her tablet with growing concern. The system was performing flawlessly, but the mission was creating situations she hadn't anticipated. The problem wasn't technical. It was tactical. Her targeting system made the SEALs so effective at long-range elimination that they were systematically reducing the enemy force without being detected. In normal combat, this would be ideal. But these weren't normal circumstances. Commander, Sarah whispered urgently. We need to leave some of them alive. Blake looked at her with confusion. Explain. Sarah pointed to her tablet, which was displaying intelligence data alongside targeting information. These men aren't just guarding weapons. According to the background files, at least 3 of them are high-value intelligence targets. If we eliminate everyone, we lose the opportunity to capture information about larger weapons networks. Blake studied the tactical situation. 12 enemies remained, but they were spread across defensive positions that would make capture extremely difficult. You're talking about a completely different mission, Blake said quietly. Capture operations require different tactics, more risk, probably casualties on our side. Sarah looked at the data streaming across her tablet. Her system could eliminate the remaining 12 targets with near certainty. But elimination wasn't always the optimal solution. Commander, what if we could disable rather than eliminate? Blake raised an eyebrow. Your system can do that? Sarah's fingers moved across her tablet, accessing subroutines she had developed but never tested in field conditions. It can calculate non-lethal targeting. Shoulder shots, leg wounds, equipment destruction. Precision incapacitation. For the first time since the mission began, Blake smiled. Rodriguez, Martinez, we're changing tactics. Ms. Chen is going to help us bag some prisoners. The next phase of the operation required Sarah's system to perform calculations she had only theorized about. Instead of center mass targeting for maximum lethality, she needed to provide solutions for precise wounding that would incapacitate without killing. The margin for error was microscopic. A few centimeters difference could mean the difference between a disabled enemy and a dead one. Sarah modified her targeting algorithms on the fly, factoring in bullet impact velocity, target body positioning, and optimal wound placement for maximum incapacitation with minimum permanent damage. I've got solutions for 6 non-lethal shots, she announced. But I need perfect environmental conditions. Blake checked the wind measurements. How long for optimal conditions? Sarah studied the weather data her sensors were collecting. Next comm period will last 14 seconds. That's enough time for 6 shots if your men can maintain the firing sequence I calculate. Blake looked at his team. 6 shooters, 6 targets, 14 seconds, 800 meters, non-lethal precision shooting. Gentlemen, we're about to attempt something that's never been done before. Ms. Chen is going to choreograph a ballet of bullets. Your job is to dance to her tune. Sarah programmed the firing sequence into her system. Target 1, left shoulder shot to disable weapon use. Target 2, right leg shot to prevent mobility. Target 3, equipment destruction shot to eliminate radio communication. Each shot required different calculations based on target position, angle, and desired effect. Calm period in 20 seconds, Sarah announced. The SEALs adjusted their positions according to Sarah's instructions. Each shooter received specific targeting data optimized for their individual shot. 10 seconds. Sarah watched the wind indicators. Her entire career had led to this moment. Every algorithm she had written, every variable she had considered, every broken piece of equipment she had learned to master. 5 seconds. Remember, this sequence happens fast. Trust your data, trust your training. The wind stopped. Execute. 6 rifles fired in carefully timed succession over 12 seconds. 6 targets dropped to the ground, wounded but alive. The remaining enemies, seeing their companions fall but hearing no gunfire due to the suppressors, initially assumed some kind of accident or medical emergency. By the time they realized they were under attack, Blake's team had moved to close-range positions. The capture operation was completed 20 minutes later with no friendly casualties and 7 prisoners taken alive. As the team prepared for extraction with their prisoners and intelligence materials, Blake approached Sarah at her equipment station. Ms. Chen, what you accomplished tonight changes everything we know about precision operations. Sarah was packing her tablet, but she paused at Blake's words. Commander, the technology performed as designed. Your men executed perfectly. No, Blake said firmly. The technology was impressive. But what you did was more than that. You made real-time tactical decisions that saved lives and enhanced mission effectiveness. That's not technology. That's leadership under fire. Sarah looked across the extraction zone where the captured prisoners were being prepared for transport. Each of them was wounded exactly as her system had calculated. Each wound was precisely placed for maximum tactical effect with minimum permanent damage. There's something I need to tell you about tonight's mission, Blake continued. This wasn't just a field test of your targeting system. Sarah stopped packing and looked at him. This was an evaluation for a position we've been trying to fill for 2 years. A civilian technical advisor position for special operations. Someone who can bridge the gap between laboratory technology and battlefield reality. Blake handed Sarah an official-looking document. Congratulations, Ms. Chen. You just passed an interview you didn't know you were taking. Sarah looked at the document. It was a formal job offer from the Department of Defense. Not a consulting contract. A permanent position. Commander, I don't understand. I'm not military. I don't have security clearance for this level of work. Blake smiled. You will by next week. Tonight proved you can perform under the most extreme conditions possible. Everything else is paperwork. As the extraction helicopter approached their position, Sarah realized her life had just changed in ways she hadn't anticipated. 3 months ago, she had been a civilian contractor trying to sell targeting software to skeptical military customers. Tonight, she had become something else entirely. A bridge between worlds. A translator between the language of mathematics and the reality of life and death decisions. But, most importantly, she had proven that broken equipment and unexpected challenges weren't obstacles to overcome. They were opportunities to discover capabilities no one knew they had. 6 months later, Sarah stood in a Pentagon briefing room facing the most intimidating audience of her life. 12 senior military officers, 2 Pentagon officials, and 1 person whose identity she had been told was classified sat around a polished conference table. On the wall behind her, a presentation screen displayed satellite imagery of a compound in Syria. The images showed a heavily fortified building complex surrounded by defensive positions and populated with an estimated 40 to 60 hostile combatants. Ladies and gentlemen, said General Patricia Morrison, the highest-ranking woman in Special Operations Command, Ms. Chen is here to brief us on Operation Mirror Shield. This represents the most ambitious application of precision targeting technology ever attempted by American forces. Sarah had been working toward this moment for 6 months, ever since accepting the Department of Defense position that Blake had offered her. But nothing in her preparation had equipped her for the weight of responsibility she felt standing before this group. The mission they were asking her to plan was unprecedented in scope and complexity. Intelligence had identified the Syrian compound as a holding facility for 12 American civilians captured by a terrorist organization during the recent evacuation from a neighboring country. The hostages included aid workers, journalists, and contractors who had been taken during the chaotic withdrawal. A traditional rescue mission would require overwhelming force, significant casualties, and would likely result in hostage deaths during the assault. The Pentagon wanted something different. They wanted precision. Ms. Chen, General Morrison continued, please explain how your targeting system can facilitate a rescue operation with minimal casualties and maximum hostage safety. Sarah activated her presentation, and the screen displayed a three-dimensional model of the compound based on satellite imagery, drone surveillance, and human intelligence reports. The challenge, Sarah began, her voice steady despite her racing heart, is that we're looking at a rescue scenario where the targets are dispersed throughout a complex structure, the hostages are being held in multiple locations, and the enemy has significant defensive advantages. She clicked to the next slide, showing heat signature overlays on the compound imagery. Traditional rescue doctrine calls for overwhelming force to suppress resistance quickly. But, in this case, overwhelming force increases the likelihood of hostage casualties due to the proximity of friendly and hostile personnel. Sarah paused to ensure everyone was following her explanation. Instead, I'm proposing a precision elimination sequence that removes specific threats in a calculated order, creating safe corridors for extraction teams while leaving hostage areas untouched. Admiral Richardson, a veteran of multiple special operations commands, leaned forward. Ms. Chen, you're talking about surgical precision over multiple target areas simultaneously. The margin for error is essentially zero. Yes, sir. That's correct. And, you believe your targeting system can achieve that level of precision? Sarah looked around the table at faces that had seen decades of combat operations, success and failure, life and death decisions that affected global politics. I believe it can, sir. But, I also believe the system is only as effective as the operators using it. She clicked to her next slide, showing personnel files. I'm requesting a team of 12 operators for this mission. Not the most senior, not the most decorated. The 12 who have demonstrated the greatest adaptability when working with unconventional equipment and tactics. General Morrison studied the personnel list Sarah had compiled. Rodriguez is on here. Martinez. Several others from your previous operations. You're building a team of people who've worked with your system before. Yes, ma'am. But, more than that. I'm selecting operators who've proven they can think beyond standard procedures when circumstances require it. Sarah clicked to a detailed mission timeline. The operation I'm proposing requires 19 precision eliminations over a 43-minute window. Each elimination must be timed to support the overall sequence while maintaining hostage safety. She took a breath before continuing. 3 of those eliminations will be conducted with non-lethal precision targeting to preserve high-value intelligence assets. 2 will involve equipment destruction rather than personnel targeting. The remaining 14 will be standard elimination protocols. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of ventilation systems. Colonel James Patterson, the Pentagon's senior tactical planning officer, spoke for the first time. Ms. Chen, what you're describing isn't just precision targeting. You're talking about choreographing an entire battle sequence. That's strategic planning at a level that typically involves months of preparation and massive support systems. Sarah nodded. Yes, sir. Which is why I'm requesting something unprecedented. She clicked to her final slide. I want to be on site for this operation. Not as an observer. As an active participant in tactical command. The silence that followed was absolute. General Morrison was the first to speak. Ms. Chen, you're a civilian contractor. You don't have training for combat command positions. Respectfully, ma'am, I've been developing that training for the past 6 months. I've completed advanced tactical communications courses, combat decision-making protocols, and stress response preparation specifically for this purpose. Admiral Richardson leaned back in his chair. Even if we approved such an arrangement, you'd be asking us to put civilian personnel in direct combat zones. The liability alone. Sir, Sarah interrupted, then caught herself. I apologize for interrupting. But, I need to explain something about how this system works. She moved closer to the presentation screen. The targeting calculations I've developed aren't just mathematical formulas. They're adaptive algorithms that respond to real-time changes in battlefield conditions. Wind speed variations, target movement, equipment malfunctions, unexpected tactical developments. Sarah looked around the table. In laboratory conditions, the system can be operated remotely. But, in complex combat situations with multiple variables changing rapidly, optimal performance requires human judgment integrated with computational precision. She paused to let that sink in. What I'm telling you is that for this mission to succeed, my system needs to be operated by someone who understands not just the technology, but the tactical implications of every calculation. And, you're the only person who has that understanding, Colonel Patterson observed. Currently, yes sir. General Morrison stood up and walked to the wall display showing the Syrian compound. Ms. Chen, let me be very clear about what you're asking. You want us to send you into a combat zone where you'll be making real-time targeting decisions that will determine whether 12 American hostages live or die. Yes, ma'am. You understand that if your system fails, if your calculations are wrong, if anything goes wrong with this operation, those hostages will likely be executed immediately. Sarah felt the weight of that reality settle on her shoulders. I understand, General. Morrison turned back to face the table. Gentlemen, I need to discuss this with Ms. Chen privately. Please give us the room. As the military officers filed out, Sarah found herself alone with the most powerful woman in American Special Operations. Sit down, Morrison said, not unkindly. Sarah took a chair across from the general. Off the record, what's your real confidence level in this operation? Sarah had been expecting this question, but she hadn't prepared a diplomatic answer. General, 6 months ago I was a civilian contractor who had never been in combat. Today, I'm proposing to direct a precision rescue operation that's never been attempted before. She met Morrison's eyes. My confidence in the technology is near absolute. My confidence in my ability to operate under extreme stress is theoretical. But, my confidence in the people I've selected to execute this mission is complete. Morrison nodded slowly. That's the most honest assessment I've heard in this building in 20 years. The general stood and walked to the window overlooking the Potomac River. Ms. Chen, do you know why I've been supporting your work here? No, ma'am. Because warfare is changing faster than military doctrine can adapt. We're fighting enemies who use social media as psychological weapons, who hide among civilian populations, who turn our own precision capabilities against us. Morrison turned back toward Sarah. Traditional military thinking says overwhelming force solves problems. But, in the modern world, overwhelming force often creates bigger problems than it solves. She returned to her seat. What you've developed isn't just targeting technology. It's a new approach to conflict resolution. Precision instead of power. Surgical intervention instead of massive deployment. Morrison picked up the mission folder. I'm going to approve your operation, Ms. Chen. Against my better judgment, against standard protocols, and against the advice of every senior officer who's reviewed this plan. Sarah felt a surge of excitement mixed with terror. But, Morrison continued, I'm attaching conditions. Yes, ma'am. First, you'll have a military co-commander for this operation. Someone with combat experience who can make tactical decisions if your system fails or if you become incapacitated. Sarah nodded. Second, you'll be equipped with emergency extraction protocols. If the operation goes wrong, your primary mission becomes getting yourself out alive so that your system knowledge isn't lost. Understood. Third, this operation will be documented extensively. If it succeeds, it becomes the foundation for a new special operations doctrine. If it fails, it becomes a case study in why civilians shouldn't be placed in combat command positions. Morrison stood up. Ms. Chen, you're about to become either a revolutionary figure in military history, or a cautionary tale about the dangers of untested technology. Sarah rose from her chair. General, I understand the stakes. I don't think you do, Morrison said quietly. The 12 hostages are important. But, they're not the only lives at stake here. Your targeting system is going to be evaluated by every military force in the world. If it succeeds, precision technology becomes the new standard for special operations globally. If it fails dramatically, it could set back technological integration in military applications for decades. Sarah felt the magnitude of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a physical weight. Ma'am, who will be my military co-commander? Morrison smiled for the first time during the meeting. Commander Blake specifically requested the assignment. Apparently, he's developed considerable confidence in your judgment over the past few months. As Sarah left the Pentagon briefing room, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months ago, she had been demonstrating targeting software to skeptical SEALs who handed her a broken rifle expecting her to fail. Tonight, she would be flying to Syria to attempt the most complex precision operation in military history. The mockery and doubt she had faced at the beginning of this journey had transformed into something she had never expected, the opportunity to redefine how conflicts could be resolved. But, more than that, she had learned something about herself that no amount of laboratory testing could have revealed. She was capable of carrying the weight of other people's lives. And, tomorrow, 12 hostages would discover whether that capability was enough to bring them home.